Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Roleplay Chat. I'm Matt, a game master who can't stop talking about role playing games. In today's episode of Roleplay Chat, we talk about creating and running NPCs. It's a topic that we had on the show, I think 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years ago. It's been a long time since we've talked about NPC creation on Roleplay Chat, so I'm really excited to dive right into today's episode. Before we do that, though, I have a couple of quick little updates for everybody listening. So, first and foremost, there's no indie showcase in this week's episode. I've actually run out of indie games in my little backlog. So, for the time being, I don't have any. But that's going to be all right. Don't worry, the indie showcase is here to stay. I think it's a really fun little interlude, and I hope everyone listening has enjoyed the recommendations that have come your way so far. The second update is that this is probably going to be the last or second to last episode of Roleplay Chat before Christmas time. So the only other episode that's going to come out before Christmas is probably going to be my PAX Unplugged retrospective episode. So it's just going to be me, or maybe my friend Alex. Alex is a friend of the show who joined me this year at PAX, is gonna come and chit chat with us as well about kind of his experience, and we're gonna go over the PAX survival guide, if you would. But in any sense, that's probably gonna be the last episode of this calendar year, and this episode here about NPCs is gonna be the last, quote unquote traditional roleplay chat discussion interview type episode before the end of the year. So if the PAX retrospective doesn't find its way to you before Christmas, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas and any of the other winter festivals or winter celebrations. If you celebrate those things, I'd like to wish a happy Hanukkah, a happy Festivus, you name it. If you celebrate it and it's one of these Christmas time, winter time festivals, I hope you have a wonderful one and a happy new year. And without further ado, let's dive right into today's episode about NPCs. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Roleplay Chat. I'm Matt, a game master who cannot stop talking about role-playing games, and today I am extremely excited to be talking to you all about NPCs, their creation, and everything that goes into making fun and engaging characters at your gaming table. I am honored today to be joined by the host of another discussion podcast similar to this, who is a game master and a creative, just like me over here in podcast land. Please join me in welcoming Kurt to Roleplay Chat. Kurt is the host of Sidekicks and Sidequests. Kurt, why don't you say hello?
Hello, yes, nice to meet everyone in roleplay land, roleplay chat land, I should say, in the province of roleplay, the province of podcast land. I don't know. I
Podcast
was trying
land.
to make a nice metaphor there, but yes, name's Kurt Krenwogi. I run Sidekicks and Sidequests, the best unofficial Dungeons and Dragons podcast, in my humbly biased opinion, as I like to say at the top of the show. Just had Matt on recently, so if you haven't checked out our most recent episode, the time of this recording should have been last week, where he made a pretty cool little dude named Ambrose Eusebius, the Hidden Heretic. That was a very cool episode. But yeah, you can find me on all major podcasting platforms and YouTube, so I can be found there. And then if you're looking for me on social medias, all you have to type in is side K Q, so side, the word side, and then K kilo, Q queen, and then podcast. And that's everywhere on all the major platforms, and the website, of course, sidekicks and sidequests.com.
Yeah, it's an awesome show. I really encourage everybody to go check it out. And it was kind of the inspiration, really, for the topic of today's, philosophical deep dive on NPC creation. Because Kurt, you definitely create a lot of really awesome characters on your show. So I mean, maybe the a first great question to ask you is, who are some of your favorite NPCs, whether they be, from folks on your podcast or in your own homebrew world or role playing game or what have you. But some of your favorite NPCs.
Oh man, that's always like asking a parent, "Who is your favorite child?" and your children are all staring at up at you like, "Yeah, I dare you to answer that question." No, I mean, they're all my favorites. Like every one of them, every one from like the goofy ones that I had to think of like in the minute, on the spot, or the ones that I was like, "Oh, I need to really think about this one." And just the podcast as well, where it's where I think the strength of the characters that we make on my podcast is because it's not all just me. It's a collaborative effort with the guest. Um, because for example, if we look at your episode, you're like, "Hey, this is Ambrose. He was in a Warhammer TTRPG one shot I ran a couple years ago, and like this is what I got." And then we did some random dice rolls along with what you remembered about the character, and suddenly we discovered like this whole new dimension to who Ambrose Eusebius was. And so, like, that's the juice, that's the secret sauce behind Sidekicks and Sidequests and just how I think of NPCs, the best NPCs, at least that I come across, are the ones that are typically made in collaboration. Um, but again, I'm also surprised whenever I'm running games and, I have a player character that boldly and confidently is like, "Oh yeah, this is so and so," and like this, and they give me a couple notes. I'm like, "Great, this is awesome. Okay, let me run with this." And then, we have the rapport back and forth, and they're a living, breathing character when I only knew about their existence, like 5 seconds ago.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And you know what? It's fun that you say that a good NPC on your show in any way, in any sense, is an NPC that's creative collaboratively because I think that those do make the best NPCs at the table too, right? Whether we realize it or not, most of the best NPCs that I've played as in a role playing game are the ones that the player characters help me create. They're the
Mhm,
NPCs that kind of are born out of the player's interest. So you
mhm.
start off maybe with somebody who wasn't going to be all that important in the first place, but the players just end up paying so much attention to this character that you have um, no opportunity but to make them important. There was one NPC that comes to mind for me recently that we've been playing in my homebrew game. Um, his name is El Salvador, and El Salvador is the mayor of a small town in this empire
The
that's
Salvador, apparently.
yes, the Salvador exactly, and he's this mayor of this small town in this empire that's constantly at war with a bunch of pirates. So there's a lot of things going on in the fringes of this empire. And El Salvador at the very beginning was just meant to be this macho NPC. You know, that was all I had in my notes for who he was macho, maybe with like a really impressive beard. You know, one of those like really thick beards that seem to just have a personality all on its own.
Yeah.
But then my player characters were so suspicious of him and another character in the town that I'm like, well, I gotta add something to this character. I gotta make him a secret like drug lord, right? Like
Mm.
that's the first place your head has to go to when when your party thinks something is suspicious. So secretly, I made that part of his backstory, and my players, of course, through playing in this game now for almost 2 years, have brushed up against El Salvador in a number of different scenarios, always in allegiance with him, right? Always as agents of good, but they slowly learned about this in more concrete ways, and now they're interacting with him again. They talked to him last week, and they basically confronted him. They were like, "El Salvador, we know about your dirty little secret. We know about your drug ring." And I wasn't expecting them to do that. Um, but I basically made him invite them to a meeting in his office, lock the door behind him, and promise to be his delivery people, and he would cut them in on a percentage of his earnings. And but anyway, long story short, just to reiterate that yes, the best NPCs are the ones that get created, I think, creatively, collectively. with input
Mhm.
from your table. Do you have any NPCs in your in your home games that come to memory as a potential NPC for people listening today? Maybe they could steal for their next game.
Sure. Well, I mean, just a note, as you were describing El Salvador, I was thinking of like Terry Crews, President Camacho, or if it was like some sort of riff on, snap into a Slim Jim. Like if that's like how I was imagining this guy was talking in my head. Like, Terry Crews is President Camacho from the movie Idiocracy, or
Love
um,
it, love it.
yeah, or I can't think of the wrestler now. Cream of the crop. He talks like that. He played Bonesaw in the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. I'm blanking on the wrestler's name. Oh my gosh. Randy Savage. Yeah,
Randy
yeah, yeah,
Savage, yeah, Randy Savage, that's it. Yeah, no, no,
yeah. I
his voice, El Salvador's voice is more of a Antonio Banderas
Oh,
attempt. You know,
okay.
he
He sounds
well
way smoother. He doesn't sound like a president of a futuristic, idiotic America or something like that.
exactly, that's it. Yeah, I mean, hey,
Okay,
if people listening want him to sound, he can sound however you want him to sound.
sure.
But in our homebrewed world, he's more of a uh, uh, oh, oh, welcome, adventurers. Come with me now, and I will give you a quest to complete.
I
Whatever it
see.
is that you need me to do. But be careful not to go deep into the canyon, because I've heard that there are many things that can fight against you. So something kind of like that.
Okay, okay. You were asking the question of like what's been an interesting NPC that's been developed. And I can say at least from that player and that campaign that we've been doing and that is still active and ongoing. Eventually, hopefully, maybe there will be an art account and a presence, and other people will get to see art depictions of this character. But there's a tiefling character that she mentioned, like in a like, oh, I'm an investigator background, kind of a bard. So like this was an old case I had. I had an undercover job where I was on a pirate
Cool.
ship, and so this was the tiefling barbarian lady that was kind of like supposed to like kind of haze me a little bit, but I charmed her and we became like gal pals while I was undercover. And so through the course of the story, I was like, "Oh, where she is on this adventure. Let me have her roll a D100 and see if she's here." Okay, she is. And so then I was able to like introduce her into the story, and so she was quickly adopted into this JRPG party. But we've been working on this arc, uh, and I don't know if this is exactly the question that you were asking, or maybe alluding to, of like what helps to make this kind of an NPC interesting is that as time has gone on and this campaign has had combat, but it's also been heavily more role playing focused and really getting to dive into some deep questions. Um, and so just naturally, organically through role playing and stuff like that, I decided that this character, she was a mom and
Mm.
she had become a mom at a young age because she lived in a lawful evil society that was isolationist, hell aligned sort of society, majority tieflings. So they were very lawful evil society, piracy, the frigid Arctic North. So it's kind of the situation where she grew up, and so she was forced into having to work in a brothel and a very abusive and not great environment. I decided, and in a moment of role playing, I just let slip that like, oh, I have a son, and then like that changed the whole dynamic and like really helped
Hmm.
to humanize her. And then just slowly growing this personal quest for her retainer, kind of like in Mass Effect, of like these loyalty missions for your party members. And was like, oh, she wants to get her name back because the name that she's referred to is like she was basically not arcanely prevented from using her name, but, like, in a society honor sort of a sense, like, her name was stripped from her, and so she has to go by this, other name. And so her personal quest is, "Oh, I wanna reunite with my son, and I want to, get my name back." And so just recently, we finally, got to this point where it was like it was precision. It was like SEAL Team 6 where, like, she was upstairs running interference, and then the rest of the group was downstairs facilitating a jailbreak, and then, they were able to rescue the son. They were able to get revenge on the father of this, child and the situation that they were all in. And then they were able to go to another part of the city and actually confront the noble who, like, took her name away. And so, yeah, it's just been really
Cool.
interesting, like, with this character that was mentioned as like, oh, she's kind of like this big, muscly, brooding sort of tiefling that was supposed to haze me on a mission way back in like this backstory sort of a thing. And then I've been able to weave that into the story, and she's like this very lovely, engaging, just, we've joked like sort of like our Karlach, if you will,
Mm,
for our one-on-one game.
yeah. Love it.
Um,
Love it.
yeah.
That's
Sorry if that
great.
was a bit of a long-winded answer, but and
No,
a little bit
I
of
think
tangents. Yeah.
I think that's great, and I think it gives people listening, things to inspire themselves off of. And I think when we're creating NPCs in a game, it can be hard. It's I think for me, one of the biggest challenges is that when I'm running my games,
Mhm.
the amount of NPCs that my players run up against, especially when we're, in role play mode and maybe they just finished a dungeon or something and now they're exploring town, they're probably interacting with anywhere from 2 to 6 NPCs in one, 2.5, 3 hour session because they're going to the bar or they're going to the shop or they're going to the market and they expect and I want to offer to them the
Mhm.
opportunity to interact with the denizens of the space that they're in. Um,
Mhm.
and it's not obvious, and I'm sure this is a challenge that a lot of game masters come up against is that we're plopping these characters, sometimes completely improvising them. Like
Mhm.
perhaps we have a random table, like you said, but that random table includes something like a name, a character race, maybe a profession. That's it. Like that's
Mhm.
that's what we're going off of, or at least that's what I'm going off of 9 times out of 10. Um,
Mhm.
so I'd love to know, Kurt, in your experience, what
Yeah.
kind of strategies you've employed when improvising one of these one of these NPCs,
Mhm.
and especially in the context of an NPC that might play a bigger role moving forward. If this is an interaction in the king's court and they, in your description of the king's court, you're talking about the head guard standing off in the corner or whatnot. How would you improvise an NPC that might come back many times? An NPC that might end up becoming a staple character
Mhm.
every time they visit the king or every time they go to the market or what have you.
Yeah, sure. Um, yeah, no. So, I mean, I think it's changed over time as how I like spontaneously invent characters. I think reading a lot of books or listening
Mm,
to a lot of podcasts or watching a lot of movies and television, you get inspired. You see, what sort of characters are popular in the media. So, I mean, I just made an allusion to Karlach, and so like we have like these shorthands for like different kinds of characters and stuff like that that exist. So like in a moment, I'm just trying to remember like one of the times where I was running in person, they had to go to a town and they had to fight all these deep scions that were in the town because this was a town that was nearby a lake. And I was like, oh, I need like a villager. And I think in my head at that point I had like I was working on a pun sort of name. So I was like Don Quixote, Donald Keyholder. And then I spun this whole thing of how he worked out of a windmill, and his windmill had like 47 locks on the door because he was a keysmith, he was a locksmith.
mhm,
And so he's like this very eccentric sort of like locksmith that lived in the town, and because his windmill had been like super fortified, like that's how he was able to survive this attack of the deep scions and stuff like that that had risen up from underneath the water or whatever. So
cool,
like, in
cool,
that
cool, cool.
instance, it was like, okay, I had a pun or I had a joke or something in mind, or, like, "Oh, I'm really into this show right now." Okay, well, then maybe I can take that, tweak it a little bit, and then figure a way to like bring it into my game. That might be a way. But honestly, because of late, I've just been doing play by post or just writing back and forth in Google Docs. It does allow you a little more free time or a little more flexibility to think. So like my player can like, you know, leave me a post and say like, we're going to this place. We're going to go do this thing. Who do we meet? And then I'm like, oh, okay. Well, who are we going to meet? And so I go to my table that I use for the podcast. And what I'm really doing is I'm going to the ancestry table. So the D100, and I'll just
Mhm.
click a D100 roller. And so if it is someone important, like, oh, who's going to be the captain of the guard? Like if I know the setting, then I can just make a definitive declaration. Like when the player character journeyed to the major city that I have in the Feywild. It's probably the only actual formal piece of civilization in the Feywild ruled over by an archfey. And I was like, okay, there's got to be a captain of the guard at the skyport where they're landing. And it's like, well, the majority of the denizens of this community are going to be Eladrin, those elves who stay behind in the Feywild and over time influenced by the Feywild and their patronage to Archfey. That's how they grew into their appearance of looking like Eladrin. And so it was like, oh, it's
Okay.
winter right now because of plot reasons. So okay, so the captain of the guard is a winter Eladrin, and so then I just went to fantasy name generator and clicked it a few times. Then it was like, okay. And then I just had the idea of like, okay, he's the captain of the guard, so he's, he follows the orders of his queen. He's gonna be like no nonsense sort of a guy. And so then I just had to dig into a couple notes, and then I found the character and was able to type and make him a very sort of like no nonsense, like you came here illegally and broke the law, didn't you know? No one's supposed to come into the city, and then basically trying to give my player a hard time, and then eventually she was able to have her audience with the queen and sort of get her revenge, if you will, or like her,
Yeah.
have the captain have his comeuppance because he gave someone a hard time that was actually like helping to make a major breakthrough or whatever for the one of the background plots or something happening.
Okay,
um
okay, okay. I like that. I
Yeah,
think
so definitely if I have to invent someone in the moment, like, I'm
uh,
trying to think, she was at the Cadence, she's like, "I'm gonna stop in this clothes shop," and I was like, "Okay, let me roll a couple times." Satyrs, okay, so it's a couple of satyrs, and I must have seen something recently of Robin Williams, and I was like, "Oh, Robin Williams is in that Birdcage movie." Okay, so then I get this mental picture of like, okay, there's this satyr that's running this, clothes shop, and he looks very much like Robin Williams from Birdcage, and that means that he has a male partner that's also a satyr, and it's like a Nathan Lane sort of a satyr character. And then I just sort of leaned into like the eccentricities of both Nathan Lane and Robin Williams, and maybe watched a clip or two of Birdcage and was like, okay, so these are how these characters should act. Put my own spin on it, and then like and now she's like, "Oh my gosh, I love these characters. I wanna go spend all my money at these guys' shop," kind of a thing.
that's the true mission, isn't it? Make your players spend all the gold you've given them.
Yeah,
Find a
yeah,
way to spend it all. No, I really like that. I really like that. And then of course, Kurt, we have the dilemma of sometimes having NPCs that are certainly far more important to the
mhm,
world that we're playing in. You know, there
yeah,
are faction leaders or rulers of a space,
mhm,
maybe even the big bad. I mean, I don't want to get too much into creating villainous characters at this point, but
sure,
there are certainly NPCs in our world that are going to have a bigger impact on the
mhm,
world itself.
yeah,
And I think I'd be remiss not to talk to you a little bit about what kind of things you think are important in
mhm,
thinking up ahead for these kinds of, faction leaders
mhm,
or ruler type characters.
yeah, so, I mean, so this player character that I'm with on a one-on-one game, she was also in an online game that I ran, with a multitude of people. And it was the cadence is my ship on the sea, like the city state on the sea. It's like a mile long ship The idea being
Cool.
like it's a cross between like the Irish rover that you hear from the folk Irish song, but also like Noah's Ark and then the Freedom Ship. So it's kind of like an amalgamation of a bunch of different ideas, but essentially like it's a living city in this ship. And so as I was developing that center of civilization in my mundane world, certainly I went to a lot of Matt Colville running the games videos, especially his world building streams that he did, not only with the Collaborous world building streams that he did, which are fantastic, but even just rewatching his world building streams recently, where he was developing capital for the Chain of
Mm-hmm.
Acheron campaign. And so talking about like the faction leaders and some of his advice in there. So certainly I lean heavily on the teachings of Matt Colville. But certainly, there's been other helpful information online, whether it be from Matthew Mercer or Legal Kimchi or Super Geek Mike or Ginny D or any number of awesome creators that are out there. I certainly hope I'm not leaving anyone out. So it's certainly been an amalgamation of ideas that I've just absorbed over the years. But I know that with the cadence, I did open it up as an opportunity. I remember going on Facebook and I was like, "Hey, I'm about to run this campaign. I need like 7 people to be major faction leader, NPC
Mm-hmm.
people, and then I need like 5 people to be ship captains." Because the big tension that I had for this group was that the ship has docked, but it's stuck here because the admiral has resigned. The admiral is the overall leader of the
Mm-hmm.
Navis faction, the military, which has 3 branches. Um, and so the way it's a very, there's a council of all the other major factions on the ship, but they all listen to the Navis, because they were the ones that were divinely appointed to be able to like run the ship and keep it going, keep everyone safe. And so it became an interesting thing where it was me working with people that I tapped to represent these factions that I invented. So I knew what the factions were, but I left it open as to like, well, who are the leaders? Now, some of the factions did have like certain head. Like I remember like the Colony Arcanum was basically like the magic faction on the ship. And I invented like the various leaders of the schools of magic. And so when I tapped that person to be the NPC major faction leader, I was like, you could just pick one of these people and then decide who the leader is of the faction overall. So she went through the list, she picked the one, and then I worked with her in that case to then further develop the character, like the nuance and stuff like that. Whereas the others,
Cool.
I left it totally open. I was like, I know that this, like, the mercantile faction, who basically is in charge of all the ship, the like the merchants and stuff on the ship, that are in kind of like from Colville's Chain of Acheron. It was the guilds versus the lords. So it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
the mercantile, in my sense, were like the up and coming guilds that were in competition with the community, which was like the nobility that had hung around for centuries or whatever, centuries, thousands of years. Um, so the mercantile I left open. I remember tapping my cousin Seth to run that faction. I was like, you could be whatever race in this one. So like, who are you gonna be?" And then he decided that like, oh, my character is gonna be a changeling. I was like, okay, cool. So what's your changeling's name? I came up with the name, and then came up with all these cool faction details about like how this changeling, because was surrounded by all these various merchants from different ancestries and backgrounds and cultures, made use of the fact that they were a changeling, so would change, like, maybe one day they would be like a half orc man, but they would be wearing like Fearbog women's fashion or something like that, and like being very peacocky and ridiculous and superfluous for the fact that they could rub it in the face of like everyone else on the ship, because it's like, I'm the president of the mercantile and like I have power. I'm a major
Yeah.
faction leader. I sit on the council of the ship and like I'm untouchable in a way. So yeah, I tapped different people to collaborate with me to be able
Cool.
to
That's
invent
cool.
these major faction leaders. And so then when the party was, doing their adventures and stuff like that, like Matt Colville talks about this all the time. Like, I had friends of mine that I couldn't play D&D with run these major faction leaders. So then that way, when the players did something that came up against that faction for good or ill, I could then turn to that person and say, "Hey, the party did this. How would you react? How would your organization react?" So then it like
That's cool.
it eased some pressure off as far as like, do I have to think of everything? Um, but it also was like, it gave it some chance, it gave it some randomness and some variables, because now the players, aren't necessarily going against what how I think it should have gone. It's like there's
Yeah.
someone else, there's a living, breathing authority that rests with that major faction leader, and so whatever you're doing, regardless of what choice you make, there's gonna be a reaction, um, with that
Yeah, I
faction, with
really
that
like
leader.
that idea. That's a really fascinating way to kind of play it out live too, right? To have somebody else help in that sense. And I guess it comes back to this idea of collaborating on a character.
Yeah.
Um, for me, when I make my NPCs that are quote unquote important
Mhm.
NPCs, um, kind of like you're saying there, Kurt, I do like to inspire myself from the advice of a lot of the great D&D advice givers, but one thing that I found to work the best for me is in
Mhm.
addition to a lot of the regular recommendations of like giving them a motivation and maybe giving them like a kind of secret that they hold close and dear to their heart for the players to
Mhm.
one day discover perhaps. For me, the fun usually lies in making this person a character. Like,
Right.
actually have fun with who this character is because they're going to come back several times, throughout the adventure or the campaign or what have you. And
Mhm.
I find for me the best way for them to consistently be the same, because
Mhm.
let's not neglect the fact that sometimes role playing a character can be hard, right? Getting yourself back
Right.
into the skin of that character isn't always easy. Um,
Mhm.
for me, it's much easier if they're like a personality for me to embody.
Right.
If so for instance, one of these quote unquote important NPCs in my world, her name is Lady Libitina. And Kyle and anyone else listening from my homebrew game, pause here or skip ahead 5 minutes because I don't want to spoil some stuff for you. But Lady Libitina is secretly a goddess who has fallen from grace. She has done
Mm.
something unforgivable and has fallen to the realm of mortality. And she is doing everything she can to get back that position of power. She is an agent of good. So she's doing everything she can to help humanity. She has essentially raised this faction and is the organizer and leader of a faction of, I want to say, like funeral embalming, funeral services, like almost like a deity that will help people pass to the next life. So she has this sisterhood of other women who she's trained in this practice of preparing the dead for the next life, embalming people and transitioning them to the next life. But deep down, her motivation is to do everything she can for herself and to
Mhm.
get herself back at the seat of gods and the table up top. And so for me, playing this character is so much fun because I'm playing this really, really good character with very selfish motivations. And it's so much fun to have that like back and forth whenever
Right.
the players interact with her. So so anyway, I challenge anybody listening when they're creating one of these characters that they know is going to be important to do something for you. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, yeah, we're here for our players. Yeah, we're here to make a fun game for them, but we're here to make
Yeah.
a fun game for us too. So we might as
Oh,
well
yeah.
make the characters that we're going to be playing interesting for us to role play as well. Um,
Yeah. The Sisterhood of Morticians. That's very, very interesting.
yeah,
Um,
it's a fun time.
Yeah, well, I mean, this character sounds exactly like Ambrose Eusebius. The fact of like, oh, I'm this pretty golden boy, and I'm so in tune with my God, but yet, deep in the heart of Ambrose Eusebius lies that nihilism and
That's
his
true.
his extreme views on how you should actually carry out the will of your God.
Definitely, definitely. And it's now time to do our internet grab bag. Let's see what the internet says we should do when we create an NPC. And I'd love
Ooh,
to hear your 2 cents, whether you agree, disagree, or where the golden nugget might be in this advice. So I have 6 pieces of advice. Are you
okay.
ready?
Yeah, well, let's see. They always say to believe. Abraham Lincoln once said to believe everything on the internet. Isn't that right?
Exactly. That's exactly what Abraham. I mean, I think I saw that on Wikipedia, right? That's what he
Yeah,
said.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So the first piece of advice here comes from an article on World Anvil, and the article says that when you create an NPC, you ought to make them active participants in your game through their actions, motivations, and the way they engage with your party. How do you feel about that? Make them active participants in your game through motivations, actions, and the way they interact with their party.
Uh, I mean, yes and no, I guess would be the way I answer that because it depends. Like everything has context and it has
Mhm.
its place. Obviously, if we look to like some of our favorite video games and stuff like that, whether it be an MMORPG on a computer or something like that, and like, hey, I'm just the civilian that's idling in the marketplace, and I have a bright yellow exclamation point above my head. I'm waiting for you to come to me in order to do the side quest. Um, because it sounds like otherwise, this advice is talking about maybe like these motivated NPCs that are actually functioning like rival adventuring counterparts to the party, or
Mhm.
they're villains or something like that. It just kind of depends on the character. I mean, you certainly want your NPCs to be living and breathing and thriving in the world. Everyone talks about like, oh, Skyrim, you could just follow this random guy walking down the road and, it's not just like some sort of like dumb program loop. Like he's actually doing something and he varies up his activities based on what day it might be in the game. So like you do want your world to be um thriving, to have consequences, to have a verisimilitude, plausibility and all this stuff. But you don't need the Miller going around saying
Mm.
like, running up to the party and being like, "You owe me money," and then socking someone in the face just because, like, "Hey, I want my world to like be in your face." It's like, no, it's got to be believable and it's got to fit the theme and the tone of your campaign. Now, if you have like some sort of insane virus or plague sweeping the land and the miller runs up to you to slug you in the face because like, okay, well maybe that fits in the tone of your world and helps to amp up the stakes, but otherwise if it's just like, cottage core sort of like TTRPG experience, then that might be very weird and out of tone.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I also think that it's while it might be good advice in the context of creating, quote unquote important NPCs, I
Mhm.
think it's a lot to ask of a game master to consider doing this for every NPC that the party engages with. Like some of these random table NPCs that might only show up once and then disappear forever.
Right.
I think it's a lot to consider.
Colville's Yeah, Colville's video, dedicated running the game video that he did on NPCs, he talks about like how, NPCs are like actors where they live and die. They live the moment they come on the stage and they die as they go off stage. Now, there are some other points and things that I've expanded upon, in my own thinking and way of running games and stuff like that. Um, that aren't like just so clear cut of like, oh, they'll never see
Mhm.
this NPC again. It's like, I do try and logically think like, oh, if my player is going to go back and interact with this person, okay, based on the circumstances of the world, has their steady state changed? Are
Yeah,
they doing
yeah.
something? Are they doing something different? Are they trying something new? Um, are they gonna react based on, like, the news and the rumors, surrounding the player? Like, "Oh, hey, you haven't been in this bar in a while, but, like, oh, man, I heard you played, like, a killer show and, like, people are talking you up and hyping you up and stuff like that. Do you want a free beer?" Kind of a thing, whereas before it
Mm.
was like, oh, the bartender didn't really know you or pay much attention, but it's like, you come back later and it's like, and suddenly you have a bit of a reputation and it's like, "Hey, I want everyone to know that you drank in my bar first. Let me carve your name into the wood and then make people pay me a silver piece if they want to touch it or something like that, because it's like good luck or whatever."
Yeah, no, I think that's solid advice, and maybe when this particular piece of advice might come into play is exactly like you're saying, Kurt. If the party decides, "Hey, we gotta go back to that bar to talk to the bartender," okay, make it worth their while. Like, they're going out of their way to go back to visit an NPC that you've
Mhm.
established canonically in the setting. Maybe try to connect them and make them more active participants into the space, into the game. Maybe before they weren't involved in this quest, but
Yeah,
now secretly the bartender is, is perhaps funding one of the factions that the party is working with or whatever. You can kind of create that post-mortem.
yeah.
Um all right, let's go on to another piece of advice here. Uh and I should caveat this, maybe I should have caveated said this before, but all of this advice I took from research on the internet, and there was significantly more context than just like one sentence. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
it was maybe an article or a YouTube video, but the takeaway from the advice, in my opinion, is this one liner that I'm delivering to folks today. Now,
Sure.
don't go and like email or contact the people that I'm talking about saying like, "Hey, you said this and it's wrong." You should go hear out their full context
Right.
before you form that opinion. But I'm just trying to create an interesting discussion here with Kurt for us to kind of dissect some of this advice, which some of it is good, some of it's not. I think is maybe not so good. But anyway, let's go on to another piece of advice from Alchemy Circle. So this is a blog post on alchemycircle.com, and the blog post really stresses that NPCs should be relatable and believable. And we can make an NPC relatable and believable by giving them things like flaws and weaknesses, or when they interact with the party, you have them interact by sharing values or sharing experiences with one or several party characters. They really stress this as being like the core element of an NPC. And I'd be curious to know what kind of importance you give those things, Kurt, and if you think that they're kind of core to an NPC or not.
Okay. Well, I mean, the word that screams in my mind again, I guess that makes me a disciple of Colville and MCDM. Verisimilitude, verisimilitude, verisimilitude. So of that, I would say the believability certainly, but relating to characters, no, not everyone should be able to relate to your characters. You should definitely have some very alien characters, alien in the sense of like they hold just completely different world values or belief systems or how different approaches for how they would come at a problem. It's like, if you happen to come across a rival party of adventurers while you're both in the same cave, trying to fight the dragon. It's like, no, there should be the recklessly willing to endanger himself and everyone else around him dwarf that's like, "Ah, come on, we can take him." And like
Mhm.
everyone else should be like, "That guy, we should not be listening to that guy. It's like, "Ah, death and glory. Don't you know this is what we signed up for when we became adventurers." It's like, that's not what I signed up for, because I just wanted to get famous. I wanted to get a girlfriend. I just wanted my father to respect me, or whatever the relatable reason it is for the rest of your player characters. But no, the NPC should be believable for the world and the values that these NPCs hold dear, but relatable, not
Hmm.
necessarily. I mean, unless unless that's what your group wants, and it's like, you have to, fill in some sort of like quota or something like that. Like if your party like we have to have a talking dog in every campaign, then it's like, okay, fine. Yes. All right, let me fit the talking dog in here somewhere and maybe I'll get creative of like where
Yeah.
the talking dog is, even if it's not necessarily believable, but the players relate to it because of their fantasy of liking talking dogs in their campaigns or whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I think having characters that are different from the party makes them more interesting, and maybe you can introduce that layer of relatability later. If
Mhm.
you thought you were different, but deep down you both have this deep-seated concern about your mother, and you have this trauma related to your mother between one character and this NPC, and then that's an interesting aha moment. But I certainly don't think it's critical to an NPC's creation. Um,
Right.
I do like the idea of a flaw. I think that,
Yeah.
if you had to pick only a handful of things to jot down about an NPC,
Mhm.
throwing in a flaw and a motivation might be enough for you to kind of bounce off of and improvise in game. So
Yeah.
that's where I
Well,
would
that's like the
where
2014. I haven't now. I will disclaimer and say I haven't had a chance to like read through all of the 2024 updated 5e rules and
Mhm.
stuff like that in the player's handbook. I've watched maybe a couple of videos of other people like Pointy Hat and I think Ginny D both covered the new player's handbook for 2024. But in the 2014 player's handbook, at least, it there was bonds and values and flaws that were like whenever you the player character were making your character, the idea was like, oh, there was something that you cared about, there was some sort of ideal or concept you upheld. Oh, but then this is my flaw for like how you could work into your character. And now my understanding is that backgrounds are now playing a more bigger part with 2024 updated rules. But
Mhm.
I think that is something good that we can keep for our NPCs, like you were saying, like give them like bonds, ideals, or concepts that they uphold, and then flaws. Like perfect. Like I know on
Yeah.
my podcast, we make it so that, when aside from giving a physical description of the character, I have every NPC narrowed down to three adjectives. And, they could be all positive adjectives, but sometimes, like you were saying with flaws, sometimes people do like a positive. Oh, but then here's their flaw. So then you have all the notes that you have or need in order to kind of like if you quickly are looking at like a jotted note, you're like, oh, they're a spendthrift, they're courteous, ooh, but they have a deep seated fear of spiders. Okay, well now I know how to like kind of role play that character in the moment. If
Definitely.
I had to look at a quick note, index card, a bullet point statement.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know what? Speaking of Ginny D, Kurt, why don't we go to this next piece of advice? And this one comes from Ginny D, specifically from she has like a series of videos called NPCs to Steal. So if you're looking for some NPCs to steal for your games, I recommend these videos. There's a handful of them that she's created. But in these videos, she really stresses specific elements of an NPC which I think are an interesting kind of perspective to take. She stresses on the elements that make an NPC memorable and distinct, specifically. So things like what they look like, the voice or the personality of that NPC. And I'd be curious to know what your perspective is and whether you agree or not in kind of that being a tenant for NPC creation.
I mean, I would agree, would love to have Ginny D on my podcast, certainly, or have Ginny D here with Matt. But no, I think she's on the right track. Certainly for me, in the standard determined questions for making NPCs on my show, we certainly always ask what their physical appearance is because I'm an audio medium. So we don't have the video visual cues and me already having art to show of the character of what they look like. So we have to just go off of audio descriptions of the character. So certainly, physical descriptions of the character, but then the other items that she brings up are what are considered optional questions for me. So in a standard episode, like I try and hit the broad strokes of making a character. Um, but sometimes, we are just firing on all three cylinders in our brain that we're just inspired to be like, oh,
Mm.
there's just more that I know that I need for this NPC to get out there. So if you ever go to my website and you look in my write up section, the very first blog that's there is called The Questions. And it's all the questions that all of my guests all get in advance before they ever hit the record button and on their microphones for an episode with me. And so it has all the basic questions that are covered of what I think it takes to at least like from nothing to an NPC by the end of the episode, here are all the basic questions we need to answer. But then there are optional questions that do include those things like what's their idiosyncrasies? What's their personality like? How do their goals and motivations affect them based on their personality? What are the, things that they care about? What are the, how have they shaped their local area? And then like what's preventing them from being a bigger player on the stage? So those are like the kind of optional questions that I always have at the back of my mind. And not every guest uses them, and that's fine. But like, yeah, I would agree to what she says. Like to make your characters, your NPCs more interesting. Totally, yeah. If you know their idiosyncrasies or how they sound or how they talk, what kind of language they use, like that's all hugely valuable information.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it definitely spoke to me as somebody who prioritizes the, fun in playing an NPC, right? If I can think of that kind of stuff, it can be a lot of fun to
Mhm.
make up a character. I think where it becomes challenging is coming up with a lot of different iterations of those elements.
Mhm.
It's, when you're stuck improvising 5 NPCs in a night,
Yeah.
I know I don't have the, like, vocal range to improvise 5 different character voices
We
in
all
one
can't be
night.
Robin Williams. We all can't be Matt
It's
Mercer.
Yeah, yeah. So I think while that kind of stuff is a lot of fun to think about,
Mhm.
I think we shouldn't stress ourselves too hard. Cut ourselves some slack as game masters in this space.
Mhm.
Just I think giving yourself a creative appearance for an NPC or like a small quirk that allows them to stand out should be sufficient. If you can also think of 1 or 2 fun voices that you think you could A, stick with for the whole interaction, and B, return to and remember how to return to, 3 games from now if and when the
Mhm.
players come back to that NPC, then go ahead. But, um, and definitely by no means am I disagreeing with Ginny's advice, but I think we don't necessarily need to hold ourselves to that standard when we're creating our NPCs.
That might
Um,
be the homework that you do later. Like, if this is a character that
mhm,
everyone's coming back to all the time, and they were invented on the spot in the moment, and you're like, "Oh, the players keep coming back to this person. Okay, well, let me do some homework and think more about like, what were those fun beats in interacting? What were those eureka moments that I had in the moment at the table with the player characters? What were those bolts of lightning inspiration? Like in my game where I talked about like this tiefling pirate character, I didn't think, I thought she was a loner, but then like I was thinking about it, like, wouldn't it be interesting if she just had like a kid that was left with her sister way back home? And so then I voiced it in the moment, and then like the player character was like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't. Oh, this is so cool learning this new factoid about you," kind of a thing. Yeah.
totally, totally. Yeah, 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 yeah. All right, let's jump to we've got let's go 2 more, and then
Okay.
we'll wrap up the show. Um, this one I thought was very interesting, and I'd never considered doing this before reading it.
Mhm.
And this was from roleplayingtips.com, and there was an article there that basically said that when you create an NPC, you should tag them with one of the following four categories. Either they're combat NPCs, a regular cast member, so somebody that will presumably return, you know, on several occasions, a guest appearance NPC, so an NPC that might be important for a very small burst of time and then kind of disappear, or an extra. So a background character that like really has almost no significance. Um, those are the four categories that role playing tips recommends you give to an NPC during their creation. And I'd be curious to know, what your thoughts are for that, Kurt. And maybe to give it a little bit more context, I think the idea here was that each of these categories would help the game master determine like what's the most important to further develop. So if it's a combat NPC, maybe you give them spells, or you give them like stats for their armor and their HP and whatnot, versus
Mhm.
an extra character. Maybe you spend less time because they're not supposed to be very important, for instance.
I see. Yeah, well, you were explaining the question, and I know in my head I was going to like this is like a very sort of like TV or movie sort of
Hmm.
approach to an NPC, which, you know, that's one way to look at it, certainly, is like, okay, the dungeon master and collectively the player characters are in charge of all these other people that exist in the world. But as we talked about before, there's verisimilitude. There is in my personal opinion and belief that like there's supposed to be like a soul to all these
Hmm.
NPCs in a way. And now it's true, like the extras category, they may just be there to like help bring that believability to the world that like, oh yeah, there's other people that are in the bakery, waiting to get pastries. I know Jester Lavore, you're waiting to buy pastries, but like, there's three other people in the shop too. And then, like, you could easily just write them off as extras. Okay, no big deal. But in actuality, if we hone in, we drill down on this verisimilitude, this believability. Well, each three of those extras, well, they have souls, they have goals, they have motivations, they have whole lives that they've lived, and they may not be present in the mind of the DM at this right moment that they could tell you like what their story was from birth through childhood through their moment to now. But, it's just, it's a mirroring of our world. Like, how many times do you go to a grocery store or you're going about your day and you're walking past people and you can easily think of them like this is I go back to this. This is kind of like the genesis for how I got my idea for my podcast. I came across some sort of meme or Reddit post in r slash shower thoughts that was like everybody else in your life is an NPC, but everybody has like thoughts and feelings and opinions, sometimes strong opinions, sometimes no opinions at all. But everyone has a life, everyone has a beating heart, everyone has a brain in them, and there's a thinking and there's a feeling. So you can't I don't I just I feel like it's like this for this advice, like it's a good starting point, but, you don't wanna just limit yourself like, "Oh, they're just
Hmm.
an extra, so I shouldn't have to worry about them," or, "Oh, they're just a combat NPC, so I shouldn't care about them if the player characters kill them." It's like, no, they should be like, "Oh, the player characters kill this mercenary," but when they rifle through the loot when they loot the bodies like player characters are wont to do, suddenly they're finding a bunch of letters, home
Hmm.
of like, hey, he only took this mercenary job because like he was good at killing. He was in the army. This is the only work he could get because of like his violent tendencies. And he has like a small locket that has like a painting of a fair maiden inside that he was like, if I could just work one more tour, if I could just do one more job, then I can make enough money to go home and marry Sally, kind of a thing. It's like, no, there is a whole like there's a soul. All
Hmm.
NPCs should have a soul in a way. Now, yeah, like, you know, so you don't have to you now you the DM and you the player characters don't necessarily have to have a soul and a whole history invented for every character, but you should always remember that, for the verisimilitude of your games, for your world, that like you shouldn't just treat them like ones and zeros like a video game. This isn't just like, oh, I'm going to camp in the hallway and all the guards that are charging me, I'm just going to make a mountain of bodies with the unlimited ammo cheat codes that I've entered. It's like, no, every one of these guards that you are slaughtering right now has a whole life and a genealogy and a history. Literally, I think, what was it? I saw someone's Instagram video and they talked about like, for you to get here, basically, however many generations you go back, it ends up being like, it's just mathematics, but it's like basically 1,000 people had to come together to make families to have babies to have you eventually down the line. So if you think about it, it's like one NPC that's supposed to be an extra. There is 1,000 NPCs that had to come before them in order for them to even exist in this moment.
Mhm, mhm. You know what? Yeah, no, and I agree with you 100%, Kurt. I think I'd never considered categorizing my NPCs this way exactly for that reason, right? Every NPC is a character. Every NPC has a soul, has connections, has bonds to the world that they're in. Maybe I haven't thought of them in the moment when we're role playing and,
Mhm,
I'm describing the 6 people, sitting in the market haggling for a bag of apples or buying a scroll or whatever.
mhm,
Um, but one thing that I do think that these categorizations they made me think about anyway was that it doesn't hurt to think about the role the NPC you're creating should play
mhm.
in the moment, right? When
Sure.
when you think about an
The hat
NPC's
they're wearing. Yeah.
yeah, the
They should
hat
be
they're
able to
wearing,
switch hats, like, it shouldn't just be someone's
100%.
locked in at an extra. That extra could very quickly turn into an a combat NPC in a drop of a hat. Aha, drop of a
Definitely,
hat. Yeah.
definitely. But when we have a limited amount of time to prepare for our games, I think it doesn't hurt to think about like, okay, is there a combat scenario that might occur soon?
Mhm,
And will this NPC be called upon to fight for their life or fight for someone else's life? Yes?
mhm,
Okay, I should maybe think about what kind of stats this character has. Or if it's the opposite, like this is a character who's playing a role that might be recurring. Okay, I should think about that. Yeah, this is the alchemist potion brewer and there's no healing character in the party. So they're going to come back and buy potions like every other game. Maybe I should think about the longevity of this character.
mhm.
Um it was a perspective I had never ever considered before. So think about the hat that that character is going to wear in this next game.
Yeah.
Don't stress about stuff too far away, I don't think. But knowing
They're
that it
they're
can change
ball
is important.
caps, they're baseball hats that they're wearing. They're not
Yeah.
wearing football helmets that, like, you have to actually struggle to get on and off. It's like, no, they should be able to switch like, "Oh, I'm just an extra. Oh, now I'm a scheming BBEG. Oh, now I'm a combat NPC. Oh, now I'm just like a lore, uh, dump explanation sort of an NPC character." So they should be able to switch their hats very quickly and very easily. Is what I
Mhm.
think, yeah.
100%, 100%. All right, one last one. And it is a proposed formula for quickly creating an NPC from Arcane Library. And Arcane Library suggests that if you have a very short amount of time to create an NPC, they should basically be one sentence that consists of a name, an appearance, a tick or behavior, and a secret. Those are all the things you need, according to Arcane Library, to create an NPC. How do
Is
you
this
feel about that?
Arcane is this Arcane Library that does Shadow Dark?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay. Well, because I know that there's something, that may be the name of the game company or the studio, the creator behind Shadow Dark. Which that seems like maybe that would be a very Shadow Dark sort of a thing, but as far as, like, how I run D&D and stuff like that, I could agree with, like, if you have to do it quick, I could see the one sentence, but
It is, yes. You know what? I just did a quick, Google search, and it is
okay.
indeed it's
Yeah,
like a
Shadow
blog
Dark is
post.
a very different kind of game than D&D, so as a general sort of advice, broadly applied, I could see the spirit of that statement being true, but the specificity of it not so much. It
Mhm,
really does depend on the game. Like for D&D, like I said earlier, if I'm playing my one-on-one game with my player and she's going into a shop for the first time, I'm like, "Okay, well, who's the shopkeeper?" Because it is whatever it is. It's like, okay, I'm going to just roll my D100 on my ancestry table and see who I get. I might have an idea of like based on what kind of shop it is, but I'm leaving it open. I'm just letting the spirit carry me. I'm letting the Holy Spirit carry me and in the moment be inspired by what interests the player character or like what has been a hit or what would be an interesting piece of tension or just good drama or just a fun just to do because it would be funny to do. And then I'll just roll on the D100 till I land on something that I think is plausible, believable in the place
mhm,
that we're at in the story. And then I just kind of run from there. So, and then, maybe there's like an adjective or two, or there's a stereotype, or there's like a model that I'm going off of. That's how I would create an NPC in the moment. I wouldn't necessarily do like, oh, they have to have a tick or they have to have like some sort of secret or quirk. No, that's the more juicy stuff that as I'm having this NPC interact with my player characters, that could be where based on how it's going, I'm like, oh, this isn't interesting. Like there should be a secret that they have, or oh, there should be a tick that they have that'll just make this more memorable or interesting.
mhm,
Um, like, ah, okay, going back to an example, this player character, it's a Spelljammer setting. She got her own space galleon Mass Effect style ship that's experimental, circumstances, whatever. She has to hire a crew. And so, okay, she's in the shipyard of her family's shipping company. And so I'm just having to randomly roll ancestries. I'm like, okay, you have like a human, you have a half elf, you have a tabaxi, you have a bear folk, you have this or that. And then it's up to her to pick, like, okay, well, I'm going to come up to this character and say, why should you be on my ship? And then I'm like, okay, well, this is like a human man. And oh, he wears a funny helm on his head and it's gold because it's supposed to be like a safety helmet. Oh, because he had a traumatic head trauma injury and depending on how he hits his head, he's either going to be like very prone to danger and like
mhm,
thrill seeking behaviors, or he's just going to be sort of like this, brutally honest, sort of like Forrest Gump kind of a guy. And that's like something that's thought in the moment. And it's up to her, the player character, to react like, "Oh, is this someone that I wanna invite on my ship or not?" And
yeah, 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 yeah.
it's totally up to her. It could have been she picked one of the other ones, the Tabaxi, and I would have had to have thought of something else on the spot to be like, "Well, what makes this sailor interesting?" And then puts a quandary in front of my player character to be like, "Well, do you want this NPC working on your ship? Do you trust them with your life? When you're in the thick of combat or you're sailing the astral seas that you're going to depend on this person with your livelihood."
Yeah, no, I think that's really solid, and I tend to agree with you. I think the secret is an added layer of complexity to an NPC that you don't need right away.
Right.
You certainly don't need right away. It also feels maybe a little bit overkill, in my opinion, for an
Mhm.
NPC that your players are gonna meet for the first time ever to, like, out of nowhere be like, "Oh, yes, and my father used to be a dark cultist who summoned the demon spirits of blah, blah, blah." Like, that's not gonna come out in the first interaction that this person has with
Right.
an NPC. So don't even bother having it because you're gonna be tempted to give
Well,
it away. You know what I mean? And
right, right. Well, I mean, even my podcast, the tagline of it is like, I'm putting the humans back into humanity because every episode is a personal interview section because sometimes I'm inviting people that are like luminaries in the space. Sometimes they're my friends. Sometimes they're my family. Again, maybe it's someone that's been recommended to me and I don't know them. So it's like I need to get to know them as a person. And it's like when I interviewed you, like I followed you on a couple of social medias and stuff like that. And I was like, I really need an interview. It's like, let me reach out to Matt and see if he's interested. And like we, hemmed and hawed and tried to find something that worked in the schedule. Um, but it's like I could only know or learn as much about you before I interviewed you, based on your interactions on social media. And as we know, social media can be a very well curated illusion. It could be illusion magic
100%.
on social media. You're just trying to feed an algorithm. You're trying to pump out content, but that doesn't speak to anything about your heart, your soul, your mind, your character. That's why every episode of mine, begins with a personal interview section. And it's like, so it's me attempting to learn about them as a human being. So through our interview that we did on my podcast, like I got to learn about Matt as a man, as a person, as a being living and existing in the world before we even got to making an NPC. So that way there was a friendship, maybe not a full blown friendship, but at least a cordiality, a rapport that was kind of a trust that was being built up
Mhm.
between two human beings who had never formally interacted before, that could find that sort of common ground. That's what it's like in your D&D world. It's not like I can't go down Main Street of my town, clap my hand on the shoulder of the person passing me and demand their life story. No, no, no. You have to
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
warm up to them as people. You have to like make yourself vulnerable and you have to like give them that space and that air of trust and putting yourself out there and genuineness and believability and it's not like Matt's gonna Matt's there in Canada. Matt's not I don't forgive me. I am a pretty well-educated American, but I don't know if Canada has a social security system. So it's not like Matt's gonna give me his Canadian social security number. He's not gonna give me access to his bank accounts just because we interacted one time. But at least, we have a better rapport now on social media. And now we can talk on Discord or we can talk on Instagram or Threads or wherever it is that we're having conversations. And then we can have fun that way. And as we spend more time getting to know each other, we can share from our hearts and souls and we could truly become confidants. We could build up that platonic love, that fraternal love in each
Yeah.
other
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and build a deeper richer relationship like your player characters are so want to do with the cute little goblin that they spared from the massacre that grovels at their feet and is willing to do their everything just for a chance to survive. But oh, as they got to know Boggles the Goblin a little more, they actually found that like, oh no, Boggles the Goblin has hopes and dreams and delusions of grandeur and whatever else that he has in his little mind.
100%. 100%. And actually, Kurt, I think that that brings us to the end of the show with that beautiful statement about NPCs and I mean, I have a lot of thoughts because I agree with you 100%, and I feel like sometimes players think that, just because they're there talking to an NPC that they
Mhm.
are I don't wanna say entitled to, because entitled to is the wrong word, but,
Right.
they start asking questions, and it's like, "Why would this person tell you this? There's no
Right.
way that this character would tell you this if they even know it." We covered a lot of ground today as it pertains to NPCs, their creation, and improvising them or making more full-fledged NPCs.
Mhm.
So at this point, I'd like to pass the microphone back over to you, Kurt. If you have any parting words or last thoughts as it pertains to NPC creation in role playing games, this would be a good time to do that. And then, of course, I'd love for you to remind folks listening where they can find you on social media, where they can go and listen to side quests and oh my gosh, side
Sidekicks and Sidequests.
sidekicks and side quests, and yeah, and maybe listen to our discussion with Ambrose or other awesome conversations that you've had on the show.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for having me on. First and foremost, this is amazing. I haven't. It's been a while since I've been a guest on someone else's podcast, so it's always a delight to be a guest for a change instead of the host.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's
At
been a pleasure having you. It's been a pleasure
Yeah.
for sure.
Let's see. Any other final thoughts before I do all the plugs? I know a good piece of advice because of what the again, just the one-on-one game that I've been running and the things that I've been learning that I think are valuable. It could be super critical in a one-on-one game, but it may just be good advice out there for dungeon masters. Because this player character and I have been doing Google Docs back and forth. And obviously, if we're trying to refer to something that happened way back when earlier in the campaign, I'm having to dig through like Google Docs if I'm not writing it down in my own DM's notes, Google Doc or whatever. Have your player characters, or maybe you or collaboration of both of you working together, start a spreadsheet, a
Mm,
Google spreadsheet. I had my player character do this because she ended up getting a mansion. And I was like, you have to have household staff. That's more NPCs we have to keep track of. Okay. At this point, you've got a ship crew, you've got your own private manor, and just your party members and all the other important family members you have, and all these other people. It's just getting to be a lot of NPCs. Let's just start a Google sheet, a Microsoft spreadsheet, or whatever it is. Make all the different tabs so it's like, oh, these are all the retainers that are loyal to the party. These are all the family members of all the party members that are important. These are all the NPCs allies that we have. These are all the NPC foes that we have. These are all the hirelings that work for us or whatever it is.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
it'd be very helpful and good advice to make sure I pass that along before we close out. If you find that you're having trouble keeping track of all your NPCs, just make a spreadsheet. And you can, spreadsheets are pretty big. You can put in a lot of columns and a lot of notes, and make it accessible for everyone. So that way, if you're missing a detail, then one of your player characters, or you can go in and just add a quick little note. And then they're like, oh, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, that helped me remember exactly why this particular NPC was important because, oh, they knew the puzzle piece of the thing, of the MacGuffin that we were looking for,
Mm,
5 sessions ago or whatever it was. So, yeah,
yeah, very
final
smart.
advice to give before it closes out. My name is Kurt Krenwelge, the Bardic Paladin of the Sidekicks and Sidequests podcast. You can find me on my podcast website, sidekicksandside.com. That's all spelled out. I have a Patreon, various tiers of pledging of membership, and you can get cool rewards. I also have a Kofi as well. So if you don't like using Patreon, then you can do Kofi. And then I'm found on all major social media platforms. So that includes Facebook, it includes Instagram and Threads and X for however long that still lasts, and Blue Sky and Mastodon and Hive and basically all the ones that like everyone in the TTRPG space that was fumbling and being like, we're all here. No, we're all here. We're all here. So I've made social media accounts and all of those. You can follow me at Side KQ Podcast. So SIDE Kilo Q Queen Podcast is how you find it on social media. And I'm also on YouTube as well. So the podcast is also archived or uploaded as well to YouTube. So if you don't like or don't use a podcast player, then you can always find me on YouTube as well. It's the same deal, Side KQ Podcast. Um, and then yeah, so that's all my business of where to find me and where to follow along. It's a show that's meant to give you, it's a resource show. It's meant to just give you NPCs for free that you can drag and drop, you can plug and play into your game tonight, tomorrow, this weekend, next month, next year, whatever. Um, I'm trying to be better about write-ups. I know I need to catch up. But you should be able to just listen to an episode or look at the names or get the description, see who the guests I have, and then get inspired, get ideas. We're on Reddit too with our own subreddit, so I'm always interested in hearing stories of how people use these characters. And I haven't gotten any yet, but that's okay. That just probably means that people are still running games right now and they haven't concluded them for them to be able to tell the tale of when Jasper the frog knight errant in their game got them to go on their quest to rescue the frog maiden and stop the frog he-myth from being created or whatever. Um, so yeah, that would be all my self plugs, and the only other final thing would be just to remember the humanity and the souls of all the people, whether they're behind a keyboard on social media, behind a computer screen. They're the people that are sitting next to you on the bus right now. They're the people that are driving in the cars beside you on the freeway. They're the people that are in the grocery stores, and we're all coming up on the in Canada's already had its Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah, yeah, we've had our turkey and ham and all that.
Okay, well, American Thanksgiving is about to happen next week. So as we're gathering around in our households among our family, these are divisive times, and the thing to remember is love and family and trying to find common ground and lessen the divides and the stigmas that hold us apart.
Yeah, yeah. Well said, Kurt. It's hard for me to follow that, but I couldn't agree more. I hope everybody listening goes to give Kurt a follow on socials. I'll be sure to plug in, all the links that you need to find Kurt and his show in the show notes for today's episode. And yeah, and if you want to come find me, you know where to do that. That's roll_play_chat on whatever social media platform you use. And if you don't want to be beholden to a character limit, you can always contact me at contactroleplaychat@gmail.com. Thanks again, Kurt. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on Roleplay Chat talking about NPCs. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's call it a chat. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of today's episode, friends. If you made it all the way here, you are one of the true MVPs of the Roleplay Chat audience. The other MVPs of the Roleplay Chat audience are the Patreon subscribers who are supporting me through their subscription on Patreon. I'd like to thank Domil's Wondrous Works and Jason over at Shadowmane. Thanks to the two of you for supporting me. Your support allows me to continue to make this show. If you wanted to join them, you're welcome to do so by going onto Patreon and looking for Roleplay Chat. There's also a link down in the show notes. There you can subscribe to the show where you can get access to the episodes as soon as they're done, as well as extended episodes depending on the tier that you subscribe to. You can also support the show without spending money. You can do that by reviewing the show, spreading the good word, and sharing the show with your friends. If you do that, it really helps to broaden the reach of Roleplay Chat. Recommendations, personal recommendations, and word of mouth really are one of the number one ways for the podcast to be discovered. Also, if you're looking to buy some new tabletop RPG stuff, like dice, miniatures, or new games and rules and supplements, the show notes have links to affiliate links. So if you were to buy things using those affiliate links, for instance, the indie showcase that was spotlighted in today's episode, you can purchase it there, sometimes at a discount too, depending on the link, and a small kickback comes back to me. So yeah, check all that stuff out. The show notes has a handful of links there, things like Hero Forge, Drive-Thru RPG, some awesome dice makers and things like of that nature. So go check it out, and yeah, thanks again for making it all the way here. And one last thank you to Alex and Chase over at Pocket Bard for allowing me to use their music for the intro and outro of Roleplay Chat.